Well, there's another aspect to this as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the Fortnite space, like Epic, I'm not saying this is a like negative thing about Epic. I don't think Epic really likes teams in Fortnite. They do a lot of things to actually deter teams from being in Fortnite. And Fortnite to me is a lot more like the PGA Tour or pro golf or pro tennis, where you have a lot of individual talented players who could go out and become independent personalities and then play in these open tournaments and make a bunch of money. Like you have, your US Open, your British Open, your other big golf tournaments. That's how I see Fortnite esports sort of evolving. And so I think from the beginning, Epic has been like, why do we need teams in this space? Like, just have people show up at these tournaments.
I'm going to be like 100% honest with you. I've never talked about this before. This is one of the reasons why I moved from esports to the talent side of things, because I see that as sort of the logic. Like there was, how long have you been in like involved with like esports stuff, like esports, like law stuff?
Esports Law, about 2 years now.
Okay. So like, so a little bit before this, like I'd say about 4 or 5 years ago, there was like a objective point in, this is so interesting. I love this subject. And I don't ever get to talk about this. Like there was an objective point in time that was like, are publishers going to hold the ball or are teams going to hold the ball? And it was like, teams were getting
publishers.
Well, now it is. So I think you ruined my whole story. The fuck.
Yeah, sorry.
no, but that's like, but like I'm saying, like there's this point in time. Well, that's what's obvious to everybody today, right? But like back then, there was like the teams were basically going to unionize, and like almost no one knows this. This is like a really crazy thing. The teams were going to unionize and they were going to go at the publishers and basically get whatever they wanted. And what the publishers did, particularly Riot Games, okay, is they individually targeted the teams and said, hey, they went to them one-on-one and said, hey, you guys can be a part of this union or whatever, that's fine. And then you're going to get screwed, right? Like we are going to come after you. And like you won't be able to stream our game, you won't be able to play our game, like we'll kick out the LCS, whatever it takes, right? And so individual teams crumbled. And as a result, the publishers won, basically. And so ever since then, you have Riot and Blizzard and Epic as like the arbiters, like the final word on anything in gaming. And that's how it is now. So as a result of that happening and the teams kind of losing that backbone, what's really interesting going forward is like, it's very clear to me, and this is not like a law issue, but like it's very clear to me, and I've talked about this a lot, that franchising doesn't make sense in esports like it makes sense in sports. It does. You disagree? Because I can explain
why.
I'd
push back a little bit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd push back a little bit.
I can tell you why. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I this is to me like I love talking about the law aspect, but to me the most interesting aspect of esports is how do you build a new industry where there really isn't a good model for it previously, or there are at least imperfect models, because it's not sports. It's not sports.
It's not, no.
And people should stop thinking of it as like the sports analogy, because the NFL, the NBA, they do not own every single blade of grass on a field or every, parquet court. They don't own the balls. They can't just make it all disappear, whereas a publisher can do that.
That's right.
So you have to think about it as like Disney with, like I'm still trying to think of the perfect analogy. I've heard, music sort of used. I've heard, like sort of comic books, IP stuff used, but it's not a perfect fit. It's this weird in between sports on one side, pure IP on another side. So publishers have all the power in the space.
That's right.
The union idea is interesting. I don't see how you could have the teams unionize. I could see players unionizing or forming players associations, as we've started to see.
A player union is like, in my opinion, inevitable, right? But there was actually a period of time in esports where the teams were going to hire a commissioner and were going to represent themselves as a sort of like almost NBA over games, right?
Yeah, you could do a trade association.
Yes. And this fell through because of superior pressure from publishers. And like this is like something that I swear to God, like 0.0005% of people that even follow esports ever know. But like it did happen. And so nowadays we would consider something like teams grouping together to have rights against publishers as like an arcane concept because publishers have basically completely controlled the narrative. But there was a time when this was the case. So now that publishers do control the narrative, right? My argument against franchising, and I just did a big video about this, or what, did I release this, chat? I think I didn't release this video yet, but it's pretty crazy. It's like I think why franchising is like basically destroying esports is the sort of topic of it, is because the Epic Games is showing through tournaments like the World Cup, where you have accessibility for any player to join and potentially win $3 million, right? Versus these like highly gated, difficult to access franchise spots that cost tens of millions of dollars, irregardless of the ROI that they have to return to be viable, gate a lot of people out of the opportunity of playing in esports. And I would argue compete against the spirit of the game in that sense, right? Like whereas like Epic Games and people like Dota and International, where you rank to qualify for these tournaments, have their own problem with cheaters and stuff like that. But generally speaking, produce a better show and a more watched show. And I think the franchise model for publishers is something that ultimately is not sustainable for what esports is. And Epic is proving that.
It's a really tough issue because I think Epic is proving it in a game where you can play it as individuals. And with team sports, I think that's much more difficult. And especially when you're trying to build a brand like teams were in the LCS, like they're still trying to do in CSGO and Dota and other games, you want to have something that you can point to as, hey, here's the value. And when your team just maybe disbands all of a sudden and you're left with nothing, you don't have like your IP, your franchise, anything to point to of like, hey, we can resell this. So I think they were looking at franchising as a way of solving sort of roster instability and the instability of investment in the space. Do I think it's perfect? No.
Yeah.
Am I going to advocate for that as like the ideal system? Also, no. I think there are a lot of questions in esports of what is an esport, like in terms of can you make it from the top down like they're trying to do with Overwatch. I think the fact that, Overwatch League coming out trying to do a top-down game was something that to me is still very hard to watch with as many as improvements as they've done. Like it doesn't work like that. You look at the games that have been around for a long time, Dota 2, CSGO, Smash, like those things that have persisted because there's an organic community that builds up around them. Those are the games I would want to leverage on and try to say like, all right, how do we take this and make it better?
Totally agree.
CSGO to me is doing the best of anything because they've had a lot of people sort of buttress Valve's laissez-faire hands-off model, and they also haven't had an international. I actually think the international, for as incredible a show as it is incredibly damaging to the space overall.
Really?
There's some really good stuff. Will Pardon has written about this, and a lot of people have criticized Will when his stuff comes out. I think Will's one of the most astute observers of the space and writers in the space, and he has written about how the international puts all this focus on the top level so that it creates more roster instability, because you'll have teams that qualify for TI that are already qualified who will kick somebody who's qualified with them for TI in order to try to grab somebody who might make it so they can win that one top prize. So when there's so much focus on that tier 1 scene, and that's the only way you can really make money is to really go after the international, your tier 2 scene and your tier 3 scene suffer incredibly.
Isn't that the case with every single esport though? Like there isn't really significant revenue to be made in LCS Academy. I would say that's like where the most amount of secondary money is, where like you have LCS Academy players that are making like between like $2,000 and $3,000 a month in some cases for top teams. But beyond that, in like the like the tier 2 and tier 3 like CS:GO leagues and like the tier 2 and tier 3 Smash leagues, like you don't see any kind of like meaningful revenue either, right?
It's true. That's very true. The thing is, you still want a talent pipeline. So think about like with the NBA, you've got high school, college, into the NBA, right? You have a natural pipeline that feeds into that. With hockey, you've got all these farm and club systems that then feed eventually into the NHL. Same thing with baseball. So you still have to have some sort of system that comes up. And I know people who are working on the collegiate side. I mean, we were hanging out with Tyler Schroed of EGF when we first met. There are people who are working on helping to develop that scene, and that might eventually be it. But right now, there's this huge disconnect. And Will has also written about the pipeline. There's this huge disconnect between how you funnel talent upward into the top ranks. So I just think there has to be a clear system for how do you build an esport? What's a successful model? And it is going to vary from esport to esport, but you have to have a way where, this is the process we're going to do. And right now, Riot and Blizzard are doing this top-down system where they're going to say this is how we're going to do it, and they're bringing in, at least in the Blizzard case, a lot of traditional sports people to run it.
Yeah.
Valve, they're kind of like, all right, community, what are you going to come up with?
What do you want? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how are you going to take this off our plate? Because we've got like 6 people who work on Counter-Strike, and now everybody's working on Dota Underlords.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Shibo 1 has the right spelling of Will Pardon.
Yeah, I pulled it up. It's really interesting. I'm
maybe
read his stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's Will actually is Shibo 1.
It's
anyway,
definitely not.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot to be done on the legal side. If you want to get into the legal side of this, the most interesting questions I have as a lawyer are on antitrust issues in esports.
In what
when
sense?
You have for example, I asked Chris Greeley, what esports or what antitrust concerns do you have about LCS? And he gave this very polished, deflective answer that didn't really say much. Where they're basically like, I don't think it applies to us.
That's Riot's. That's Riot's specialty, dude. Like that's the Riot special. Is like, oh, let me tell you a 6-paragraph answer that doesn't say a damn thing.
Yeah. But I think there are a lot of questions where you have essentially one publisher, one single entity controlling an entire space. And it really depends. Antitrust law depends a lot. And again, this is not an area that I've delved deeply into, but antitrust law depends a lot on how you carve up the market and whether or not there is competition within the market. So if you say, like for battle royales, for example, I actually do think there's a lot of movement between battle royales because a lot of the stuff is transportable between games. Whereas with other games like MOBAs in particular, like we had a lot of people jump from Han to Dota. There's still a lot of buildup. It's still really hard to jump between League and Dota. We haven't really seen many people do that. And so if those are separate market segments, like Dota is its own market, League of Legends is its own market, and there's one publisher who controls everything, I worry about anti-competitiveness issues. So again, I'm not going to jump like way into this.
Yeah.
But yeah, Activision Blizzard owning MLG as Omni Prime is raising. Like that's another thing where you start to control all the chain of the industry as well. That's like, all right, there are no competitors at the broadcaster level because Blizzard owns MLG and that's what they use to produce everything.
Well, this may be like a really this is probably a really ignorant opinion, but it feels like to me that like antitrust seems to take like a sort of lesser category, like in terms of like how the government regards it and enforces it. Given that Safest Flight, thanks very much for the Prime, man. Like given that like essentially like, well, let me explain a little bit better. I feel like people don't pay attention to antitrust. And the reason is because like there are these massive oligopolies of broadband companies and telecom companies, right? Where there's like these obvious monopolies, even in the United States, where or basically oligopolies, right? So like, does antitrust really is that really an issue that could be a forefront issue in esports?
Well, circling back, and I realize now we've gotten way off of Tfue and FaZe.
It's
circling
actually
back to that.
This is a conversation about esports law, so that's what it's marketed as. Yeah, don't worry about it. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
But getting back to the labor commissioner and the kind of political pressure that can come, I think antitrust has so much to do with political pressure.
I see.
So you look at like all the discussions around Facebook right now. That's the reason they're, Google and Facebook and them are facing these kind of antitrust questions.
You're right.
Is because there's a lot of political pressure in that direction. So, unless that really builds up with esports, it's kind of a fun academic exercise, but it's for now just an academic exercise.
So what are the issues, if it is just an academic exercise? You mentioned antitrust, but what are the largest issues that you think are facing esports that are like kind of at the forefront? Do you think that the employee to contractor issue is sort of the number one?
I think that's waning.
Interesting. Okay.
To me, the primary mover in all of esports is copyright law, and
Ooh.
trying to figure out copyright law in a new context, I think is absolutely fascinating. I've got an article that hopefully will be published soon on players' rights in their gameplay and whether or not they can have parallel rights to a publisher in their gameplay. I think that is a key legal question, particularly for streamers, because right now all of streaming occurs under a principle that's called tolerated infringement. Like if
Okay.
you're playing a game, well, and to be fair, some end user license agreements are now addressing streaming and saying you can use this to make money in these ways. But if you are using somebody else's IP to make money, like all of esports is, like all of game streamers are,
Mm-hmm.
then you are most likely infringing on the copyrights of the publisher. And the publishers are allowing it because it's big marketing for their game. Like all of esports, to me, like there are maybe some publishers who are looking at, I'm sure the publishers are looking at how you make independent revenue through esports,
Yeah.
but they are still treating esports as a marketing arm,
Oh yeah.
as
Right.
like a lost leader to do other things.
100%. Riot at one point was actually putting it down as a marketing expense, the entire LCS. Like, like I don't know if they
Yeah.
still do, but yeah, like basically, yeah, the $700 million it costs to produce the LCS every year, like it was they were just putting it down as a
Marketing.
yeah, it's a marketing expense because I mean, basically, that's what it is. Yeah.
Well, the other thing you can do with it, I mean, I'm not a tax guy. We've got people who do tax law.
Yeah.
But if you have multiple entities and some are making money and some aren't, there are ways that you can move profits and losses around, like in terms of the tax allocation, in order to minimize your taxes. So if you have something that's losing a ton of money, apparently dinner's ready. My kid just walked in.
Okay.
Thanks, bud. I can go you later. This is fun stuff. Just we'll go until you're good.
Yeah, for sure.
So that might be another thing that they're doing is, all right, we've got this one branch of our business that's losing a bunch of money. There might be some tax benefits to having that where they can, minimize the overall gains, the profits in some other branch of their business.
So when you say the primary mover is copyright law on Twitch, there's another really interesting issue, which is this is what I was talking to another streamer about pretty recently, of this issue of like, so if Twitch, first of all, there's a whole issue of employee versus contractor issue on Twitch as well for streamers to Twitch, like from Twitch to streamers. But a bigger issue within that is Twitch demanding exclusivity from us for content, right? So like it's written into every partner contract that you cannot stream anywhere else besides Twitch. Yeah. And that's a really interesting issue to me.
At what point are you just an employee of Twitch then?
I just don't think that's enforceable. And like, because you better believe, right? Like if I had the option right now, I would be restreaming to Mixer and YouTube at the same time. 100%. 100%.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
It's two more syndicated audiences. Like I would instantaneously do that. So I don't know how much longer.
I think those are really interesting questions.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I do think those are interesting questions. I think that what you put on, you still own all of the content that you put onto Twitch. There's some weird provisions in those contracts for them being able to rebroadcast them later that I've flagged for people. They can archive them and then rebroadcast them, and some of that language gets a little fuzzier about what they can do with your content. But by and large, the Twitch agreements are you own your content, and after the 24-hour embargo or whatever, you can go stream it other places, put it on other places, put on YouTube, things like that.
Whatever you want. Yeah.
I think the other question though is we're trying to say it's the part where I think it doesn't move to an employment agreement with Twitch, and this is sort of a separate issue, is they're not controlling when you stream, they're not controlling how much, they're not controlling what you use.
It's not in their place of business. When you look at the IRS breakdown of like the reasons how the IRS actually classifies employees, like very few of them seem to apply to Twitch streamers.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's that exclusivity issue, which California cares a lot about. So it's a gray area, right? It's a trade-off.
The non-competition.
Yes.
California cares a lot about non-competes.
Yeah.
But
who wants to be the streamer that goes against that goes against Amazon to bring that issue to the courts? It's not going to be me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who has the largest litigation war chest in the world? Probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like you literally just get the army of Amazon. Like it was one thing to go like if these issues, because these issues were in place like all the way back like years and years ago before Amazon acquired Twitch. But now like when like now like I think if you go against Twitch on one of these issues, it's just going to be like, well, let me pick up the phone. And then like, I've met Amazon's head litigator, and like, that's not a person that I would ever be, I would ever want to mess with. Like it's a terrifying thing, dude. Like, that is an insane group of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I apologize for most of my profession being really scary. Like a lot of us aren't actually that scary. A lot of people like do, social security work or immigration work, like really good, hardworking people. There's a reason there's that quote about, kill the lawyers. It's not because lawyers are terrible. It's because they actually do a lot of good work to uphold society.
What's the quote mean?
We do have a reputation. Oh, gosh, it's like, hold on, I got to Google now.
Yeah.
You got me Googling. It's Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 2, Act 4, Scene 2. Let's kill all the lawyers.
This is
it's
some
probably
more shit. Yeah.
Shall we killeth the lawyers? It's probably more Shakespeare than that. But anyway, so we do have a reputation, especially litigators. I think definitely get a reputation of being these like cold-hearted. And part of it's a product of the system, right? We have what's called an adversarial system. The idea being that if both sides push against each other really hard, you'll end up at the right spot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So both sides are supposed to be like really cutthroat and everything, and then hopefully you get to the right thing.
100%.
Yeah. I kind of like to get everybody to get along, right? Like it's funny, I came in as a litigator, and with esports, I've been doing more transactional work. And for me, it's always like, all right, guys, what's the deal? How can we get this done? Like, it's been a lot more trying to do the business of it instead of like, all right, I'm going to go out and take, this zero-sum game of litigation as it gets treated a lot of the time.
Yeah. I mean, I think that particularly for just speaking as a business owner my entire life, right? Like the scariest thing for me is like when lawyers or particularly, I mean, the only thing I'm more afraid of in terms of individual private lawyers is the government. And the government itself is like when the government to me just feels like Galactus. It's like the world-eating entity that, like, basically it's not going to pay attention to you because it's so large that it doesn't care. Like, you're like an insect to it. But if you manage to, like, bite the right spot and it turns its head, you're just like, oh my God. Like it just has, it has the power to just consume your entire world and you just never come out the other side, right? Because, like, when we talk about the government, everybody always is like, oh yeah, they said this, or this is the law, or this is their law. They are they, right? It's like, everything from
it's the man, it's the big amorphous building.
They like everything from like the individual dude that knocks on your door and is going to cost you a lot in time and money to like the special forces alpha strike unit that comes out of your toilet. Like depending on like however bad it gets, right? Like there's no limit to like the GTA star system with the government. And so like those are just the last people I want to piss off on any level, right? I thought about that all the time because in the beginning of esports, right, it was impossible to be in compliance with everything. It was just impossible. Like as team owners, there was no way that we were going to file like all of this. I can't say impossible, but like it would be really annoying to do.
Really costly.
Yeah, really costly and really annoying for an organization that did. Well, think about the liability behind team houses, feeding people in team houses. Right.
There's a reason team houses are disappearing, it's not just the expense. It's because of like the liability.
It's an insane liability system that, dude, like when I was doing some work for esports teams, like I'm not gonna single myself out. It was a long time ago, but like, man, if the wrong investigator knocked on the door and was like, what's going on here? I would just be donezo. Me and everyone else at that point in time.
The funniest thing, like on the legal side that happens is I'll start talking to a longtime employment lawyer or a longtime litigator or just a longtime, like, there's anybody where I need specialized help in certain areas.
Yeah.
And I'll start explaining to them about certain aspects of esports and they'll just look at me like, how is this real? How is this a thing that has been happening? How is this like, and their brains just explode a little bit, especially talking to employment attorneys
Yeah.
about team houses,
Yeah.
their heads just like you can see the physical pain like start to come in onto
They're
their
like,
faces. They're
so
like, oh my gosh.
yeah. So like,
Yeah.
one of the funniest stories I have is like, like disclosures you have to do for M&A, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like when we're selling,
Oh dear.
for the audience, what we're talking about is when you sell a company, okay, you do a process called disclosures, which basically means you need to tell the truth on absolutely everything you ever did illegal or wrong, because later that could come back and you would be liable for it if you didn't disclose it. So like the way this looks for like most M&A is like not that bad because there's like not that many bodies buried and stuff like that. When CLG did it and I did it, right? And I like, oh man, like I had lawyers on the other side of the table that were like, so let me get this straight. like you've got a team house with a cook that is feeding people. Like, it's just like this huge list of things, right? That like I don't even want to get into because it's not that long ago. But it was like the just disclosures around that, I mean, made some people's heads spin. It was actually insane. It was so crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was shaking my head the entire time you were talking about that. I could just imagine.
It was nuts. Yeah. Like it was really insane. And like every esports team has to deal with this. You know what I mean? Like every yeah, it's a huge factor. So Duplicate says, what's the difference between talent agents and lawyers?
So agents, the biggest difference is agents can go out and source work for you. So in an esports context, for example, your agent can go out and shop you to teams and try to find you sponsorship deals. And with a lawyer, he can't do that. You or she. You could point your lawyer in a direction, say, hey, go talk to these 3 teams, and they could do that, but they can't just go try to find you work. So I could go to like, Coca-Cola and try to get you a brand deal.
Yeah.
Lawyers can give you legal advice where agents cannot. Both sides can negotiate your deals, but agents aren't supposed to try to give you advice on like, here's the legal meaning of this contract and, make edits for legal context. They can negotiate terms, but they're not going to do the legal advice aspect.
Yep.
So, yeah. And then usually how they're compensated is different. Most lawyers are compensated hourly. You can do, set price arrangements as well. Most agents are compensated as a percentage of the deals that they bring you. So those are the major differences.
Here's a really great one. I think a lot of people would want to know. What is the problem that the U.S. doesn't just adopt laws around normal sports and put esports under that as well?
That's an interesting question. So
yeah, it is. Yeah.
I think that, again, going back to that problem of analogizing sports to esports, there are a lot of really big differences, copyright being the fundamental one, but also most professional sports have collective bargaining agreements. You have a league of teams, and then you have the players who form a player union, and then the union and the league as the 2 major parties come together and they come up with a collective bargaining agreement, which basically outlines all of the issues. So there isn't a lot of sports law per se in the US. Most sports is governed. And in fact, usually when there is a law, it's an exemption. So like baseball is actually exempted from antitrust law. And I'm sure you'll see a lot of esports teams or esports leagues point to that saying, hey, antitrust doesn't apply to baseball, so why would it apply to us? And it's like, well, baseball got a special exemption as America's national pastime. And last I checked, you're not that yet. So it's not as easy as saying like, oh yeah, we're just going to apply sports law to esports. There's no necessarily body of sports law.
So this is an interesting question. I'm going to reword this question a little bit, but because the initial question is really specific, like how does likeness and licensing for traditional sports athletes in the NCAA translate to collegiate esports and players, making it a little bit more relevant to like esports law in general, and also just like injecting my own interest in this question. That was actually one of the points of contention I had about Tfue's initial contract was like this idea of like perpetual license, like across like any universe or galaxy or whatever being awarded to FaZe, right? Basically that FaZe can use his likeness without any kind of royalties forever, right? And I saw that as like pretty bad. I thought that was like not good. In terms of like licensing and like exclusivity of like using somebody's likeness in contracts, like do you think that's an actual kind of like To copy your word, which I think I'm going to steal now, flashpoint for like esports.
I think that the most valuable rights you have in an entertainment space are your likeness and image rights.
I
And
agree.
that is
Yeah,
everything that teams are banking on
I totally
is
agree. Yeah.
their ability to put up your face on an advertisement. And so
Mhm.
going back again to my Michael Jordan analogy, his platform was playing basketball. The way he made even more money was selling. I've used this earlier today, but the main way he has made money and continues to make money is selling sneakers,
Shoes.
is
Yeah.
selling Hanes underwear, is selling, burgers back in the day when he was shooting hoops for McDonald's with Larry Bird.
Yeah.
So your likeness and image rights and your ability to pursue sponsorships in an entertainment space are your most valuable asset. And I often tell players, you can give these up if you want, or you can consider, for example, taking less pay and pursuing independent sponsorships. And it really depends on where you are in the space. And as you said earlier, Devin, like everybody in this space should be building their brand. They should be doing
Yeah.
content. They should be streaming.
Not
They
just
should be on social
just
media.
just to be official, like not even in this space. If you are a person who is in
Yeah.
business and like you are planning to like leave your basement and sell a product or service of any kind, you should think about having a public brand. Yeah.
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 Along with that, the question from like 1337 have faced this, like building a brand is the way you gain leverage.
That's
If
correct.
you can
Yes.
show like, I have all these followers, I'm really good in front of a camera, I'm really good with, interacting with people. Like if you're the dude who just wants to play the game and who hates Twitter and hates social media and hates like doing any sort of
You're
promotional
so
work,
much weaker. Yeah. And I can tell you as a team,
Yeah.
he's 100% right. Like as a team owner, man, like this is actually a question that I can answer. Like, one of the huge leverage points, like the conversation I'm going to have with a dude that's like 50 Twitter followers, like let's assume the skill's the same, right? Like they're exactly as good at the game. They're both the same rank. The difference in conversation and the difference in that the numbers are going to look like for a person with 500,000 followers versus 5,000 followers is astronomical. Like it is crazy, right? Like having a brand in esports as a player, it's interesting that Ryan shows his knowledge of the space by bringing up what he just said, which is that if you're the guy that just wants to play the game, he says that because he runs into players all the time that are this guy. There are people that are like, oh yeah, like basically like I just want to be good at the game. I just want to like get really good and be competitive. And it's like I don't really want to think about all that brand stuff, right? And that's a fair position to be in, but like you have to realize like how much leverage you're giving up. Like from another really good way for players to get leverage over teams is to make teams compete against each other. So if you get reached out by one team, you can also contact like 2 or 3 other teams and say like, hey, C9 just reached out to me. I'm curious if you guys might be looking for a player of my caliber as well. And then and like
I will say,
yeah.
Be careful about the way you do that because some teams will I'll be honest, again, you want to get to a place where you get fair value. A lot of people treat negotiations in this space like we're in high school again. And they try to use every little thing to just jerk you around when I'm like, look, I want to get fair value for whatever somebody's doing, regardless of which side of the negotiations on, like, let's get to a good space. And a lot of people claw and treat it as a zero-sum game, and they'll use anything to sort of leverage against you. So you got to do it diplomatically.
Yes, yeah, I would just like I literally told a kid to like DM like 5 teams when he got an offer, and then his offer went up. But that's like maybe that's like neutral evil. I don't know. I think negotiations are fundamentally about leverage. So you're gonna get like this is like the difference between like the business answer and the lawyer answer, right? I would definitely describe Ryan as like lawful good. Whereas I'm gonna give you the answer like I think. Here's my opinion is this, okay? This is like the hot take, all right? Like, I don't think the teams are, for the most part, going to give you the same privilege. They're going to use every leverage point they have. So I would say that it's like your obligation as a player to kind of do the same thing within the realm of reason, right? And it doesn't strike me as unreasonable to message other teams and say like, hey, are you interested? Like, we're thinking about signing with C9. Maybe this is something that like you'd be interested in too. And then like seeing what they say. Now like
and I agree. I just think you want to do it in the right way so that you don't burn bridges or have it come back to bite you.
Like one of the most unfair deals that I ever signed was because Echo Fox was bidding against me in real time, and I really wanted the team. It was a whole team of people. And Echo Fox was like just throwing money at these people because they wanted the players. And so I ended up like literally going like 70% above like what I had planned to do because I was just negotiating against someone else. Like this is the case in M&A as well, right? When you're selling a company, one of the best things you can do is get 2 offers on the table because if you get those people fighting against you, the numbers go up so fast, right? Because then you're creating a sense of scarcity, basically.
You're creating a market, basically.
Yeah. I mean, like literally, that scarcity is like, okay, like look, like I'm a high in demand commodity. Which by the way, social media, like to Ryan's point, having a social media following also creates that scarcity, right? Because like the more as you get up in followers and you get up in relevance, you're entering sort of like a pyramid effect where like the people at the top of that pyramid are very valuable because there's not that many people with that kind of reach. So that's another way to generate scarcity or leverage in a negotiation. So here's a really good question from Vanadon. I love this question. What can a player union really achieve when publishers hold all the power? Seeing as the one in League of Legends never really took off, to my knowledge at least.
League of Legends hasn't taken off yet, but the guy working with them, Hal Biagas, has a lot of experience, and I think he's a really smart and capable guy, and I think he is strategically building that effort.
Interesting.
So I would say wait and see on that. We're still very early on. Again, esports time. Like everybody's like, oh, the player union has been around for like a year. And it's like, it's been around for a year. Like let's give it some time. I think the CSPPA is doing a lot of really good stuff because again, the style of Valve is if you as a community can solve some of our problems and take those away from us, we're very happy to do it. And so if the CSPPA comes in and helps to say, hey, here's when we want the player break, like they just announced today, like here's going to be the player break for 2020. You see the response from players, you see the response from Valve, like everybody's happy.
Yeah.
And so if you can do that, it's great. There are, there's a question out there as well, like how do you think players can practically go about unionizing? That is a very difficult question actually, because typically a union, let's start with the US, you don't have like a cross-ocean union. You form a specific 501c organization. So everybody thinks of like 501c3s as a nonprofit organization. 501c6s, I think, are labor organizations.
Mm-hmm.
No, sorry, it's 501c5s. Nope. Hold on. Yes, 501c5 is a labor organization. 501c6 is a trade organization, like a chamber of commerce, things like that. So you can start out as a labor organization and then you go through basically a balloting process where everybody signs on to the union to collectively bargain, and then you get recognized as a collective bargaining unit, you become a union, and then that's the like basic legal rundown of how you do it. I do think that players associations are powerful because that is the main asset that the league has, right? Or that the esport has.
Yeah.
If all the players stop playing and suddenly you had to bring in a bunch of no names and start over again,
they're dead. Yeah.
Like, think about what the fans would do. Like, they would go nuts. Yeah. So, I mean, really, if the players come together and have a unified voice and say, hey, here's some things we want, the publisher's going to listen. I just don't see any way around it.
Yeah. I mean, what I'm worried about is the publishers go after individual players and say like, well, they can't, huh? They can't do that in the same way they can do it to teams. Because if they kick an individual player out, it's going to be a shit show. Yeah, so you're right. Yeah, that's probably I totally agree.
Yeah, I think it's hard.
Yeah.
And I think that I think there are a lot of political and soft concerns, and then there are also a lot of like legal concerns that eventually come up as well. I would worry.
Oh, you would worry.
Go ahead.
I was just
I would just worry about the publishers trying to kick back against it.
Yeah. Do you see these unions as being game specific or industry wide? Do you think an industry wide union is of players is a possibility? Is that something that like could be entertained?
A union, no.
Okay.
I think that you could have a trade association that is, industry wide, but there are limitations on who you can keep out of those things. So if you start a trade association for esports, like you could have the publishers and the teams and the players and everybody join it. Whereas with a labor union, you can only have labor in it.
I see.
So I think that like having a players association will go esport by esport, because there are also legal requirements to be able to form those type of organizations where you have to meet certain standards to show why your group, like electricians, like you have to have some sort of commonality. And I've looked at this some. You actually would have to come up with an argument with like why it's only League of Legends players or why it's only Dota 2 players as opposed to a wider group.
Right.
And so again, when I talk to lawyers about this stuff and they start asking me questions, and usually the word that comes back is like, this is fascinating or this is terrifying with the player houses.
Yeah. I see like the sort of like player house thing, especially with like anybody that's like connected with a publisher. Like, Fortnite's like still doing it. Like I've got a buddy that I'm doing some work with, like this guy Hontao. He runs and he's still doing like a team house.
I know, yeah, FaZe.
FaZe,
right?
yeah. We were out with those guys. Like that guy's still doing a team house. The guy you met at E3.
Yeah, no, I remember him.
Yeah. So I don't know, it's still there, but yeah, for the in general, I think the team houses are kind of going to phase out. It's just too much liability. It's insane, especially when you get like food involved and like stuff like that. It's just it's a mess.
So I'm noticing that there are sort of a trend of questions about, what should my university has an esports business concentration, what jobs are needed in the esports world, things like that. So generally, I don't know that you need to go take any particular classes. What I think you need to do, and this is actually true, this is like general life advice, is you need to go find something that you're passionate about in the space and add value. And that's the best way you can break into the space. As far as what jobs are needed, I mean, look around and see like what problems aren't being solved. I will tell you one thing that I have heard that is in high demand, although I think that may change by the time you get out into the industry. People who can actually sell esports to the outside world.